James, we're building a game together. We haven't built any code. We haven't built any graphics, any assets. We haven't written a single bit of the story. Why are we looking at budget? Why do we care about budget now when we don't know what we're doing?
Well, because your budget's your runway, right? If you don't have enough runway to, gain enough momentum and lift, like the plane's not going to take off. So
Well,
it's a good
what do you
idea
mean
to know.
by a runway? Like it's the starting point of where all of this creation is going to come from?
Not necessarily the starting point, but think about it as, let's say, the prototype, right? Your prototype is your runway. Once you get to the end of the runway, you're either going to take off or you're not, right? So you have to figure out how long that runway is and figure out if you have the resources to get there, right? And if you don't have like the fuel, the energy, the time, like the emotional commitment, or even just money to get to the end of that runway to see whether or not your project's going to take off, that's you probably shouldn't do it, right? Like not that it's impossible. It's just that clear expectations of like, is this achievable?
This makes sense coming in with the two of us because you have a huge experience with this. Where if I was making a game on my own, genuinely, this is the last thing I would have thought about. I would have just jumped in to start figuring out what am I making? What's the story? Okay, does this work? Let's just go. And then the budget would be something where I would be doing it after. If I was to try and budget this on my own, it would be overwhelming. I wouldn't know where to go, where to start, because I've never done something like this before. So it feels like for a first game, it would just be easier to start making it and then from there learn, oh, okay, this needs to be budgeted, this needs to be accounted for, versus trying to do this now. And then if you weren't here, I would not get any of this right, which we've learned from the last episode when we were talking about budgeting. I'd have no idea. It honestly, it would have been a waste of time if I'd tried. That's how I feel with it right now.
Well, not a waste of time, but it's just being efficient, right? Finding the best way to do it, the best path to make sure that you get it done. That's really what it's about. And yeah, like most people are not going to know how to budget, and that's okay. The whole point of it is just to, first of all, your time is not free, right? That's the biggest misconception. And otherwise, it's, am I going to commit, right? It's putting something that is an idea, putting it on paper and say, okay, this is a 30-page short story. I can do this. And then, or alternatively being like, oh, this is like a 10-chapter novel. There's no way I'm going to do this, right? Like this is just way too big.
So when you're saying budget here, it sounds like you're talking about something a little bit more open-ended. It's like when I hear budget, I think of like corporate structure. This is a budget. We can't go over. If we go under, that's awesome. But it's set in stone from the start. Nothing changes. But from what you're saying here, it doesn't sound like it's quite like that.
Yeah, I'm thinking in terms of like a budget is your funds, your time, your energy, and like your mental resources, right? So like even in the corporate world, when you're building a budget for a project, you have to know who's working on the project, how much they cost, how often they're going to be working, what their work schedules are. Like all of that kind of culminates together to create a budget, right? Of course, in terms of like a boardroom meeting, people only care about like start date, end date, what's the cost. But like how you would actually go about building that includes all those factors, right? It includes whether or not, is somebody going to need a vacation in a week's time to have a mental like reset so that they come back and they stay fresh, or are we just going to grind them into the ground until they have burnout and then they're just not as effective, right? So those are the kinds of things that you have to like consider when you're producing and you're trying to help manage a team properly, and all of that should come back and reflect in your budget too.
Okay, so then when we're talking about budget here, it's not strictly just the dollar bills then. It's not just this is how much we can spend on something and this is how much can be allocated to other little parts within that spending. This is about like the budget in terms of anything that's like an expendable resource, where like time, energy, and money, possibly other things as well, depending on what's going on.
What you're doing is you're playing Sims, right? Like you are your own Sim character. I have certain levels of like motivation, excitement, boredom, health, whether I'm taking care of myself, and money. How do you go about improving? How do you go about like doing what you need to do? The only difference is we can't force ourselves to just run on empty like we could a sim, right? That's the difference. So really understanding like what your capacity is, what your funding is, how much time do you have available to work, how much time is it going to take you to design and develop something, and how much time do you realistically have to work on that task. Like all of that is important to know ahead of time so that you know how to set proper expectations. So it's not just, oh, this is a short game. It's going to take a month or 2 months, or, like you really know, you can sit down and say, okay, no, this first phase, this prototype is going to take 7 months, 8 months, however long it is. And then you can be comfortable with that. You've taken the idea and you've given it physical form that you can look at and understand and say, okay, no, I understand. And it's not about getting it right either. It's just about getting it down into a form that makes sense, right? And not get trapped in the idea that like I have it figured out up here. You that may be true now, but the moment you start working, the moment you start learning how to implement new tools, animation, etc., that's going to get all jumbled up and mixed up, and then pretty soon you're not going to remember like what's happening when, or like your initial, oh, this is supposed to take 2 weeks, why did it take 2 months, right? It's hard to keep track of that mentally.
So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this properly then. And so when we're talking about budget here itself, again, it feels weird to think about it this way, but it's not money, or not, well, money is involved in it, but it's not just money. It's also our time, our energy. And then when we're talking about building the budget, it's not like here's all of the blueprints and the framework of how this bridge is going to be built, but it's this, at least this stage, it's more about this is where we want to build it, this is kind of what we want it to do, and this is where we want to go with it.
It's about keeping it loose, right? But also defined. Like we need to know what we're doing. We need to know with appropriate expectation what it's going to take to go there, right? Like you don't just start building a bridge by throwing a log in the water and being like, oh, that was too short, and then you grab another one and you throw a bigger one. Like a lot of indies will approach this game development, right? Their first, like, let's say, serious game. They still approach it that way, and then it's a struggle. It takes years. It takes a long time, but it comes back to the bridge there. Architects design a bridge. Material, like there's people who go out there and figure out what's all the material cost you're going to need. There's people out there who go source what's the price on those material. There's people who go out there and find out, who has the skills to properly shape and mold and weld and build those structures. And then there's people out there who know how to tell whether or not the structure is going to be structurally sound, and like and on and on and on and on and on. All of that gets figured out in advance before anybody even starts like putting a shovel on the ground to clear the first like plant that's in the way, right? All of that is defined. None of it is accurate, because how are you supposed to tell, right? But it's the fact that everything is planned out. We all know, everybody who works on the project, whether it's one person or 100 people, we all know these are the things that we should be doing. These are all the things that are coming next. And so you have an accurate way to basically guess, are we on track? Are we keeping momentum? Are we 3 months in and everybody is just miserable? Like, what happened? Right? Like, you can actually look at that stuff and see it, account for it.
Which, like, it all makes sense. It feels weird thinking about that in terms of an indie game, especially for like myself as a developer, because for a studio that's been making games for a while, like, good on you. Like, that sounds awesome. I would love to have that stuff for my own thing, but for me making a game for the first time, it feels like there's just so much unknown. I'm already spending so much time and energy focusing on what is this game going to be. It's like, how am I going to know what the budget is if I don't even know what I'm going to be doing when I get to that point?
Like I do also want to note that I'm approaching this from the point of view that you're not just building a game, right? Whoever's listening, you're not just building a game. What you're trying to do is you're trying to turn this into a long-term career option. Like you want this to succeed, right? Whether what that success looks like to you can be very different, but you still want this to succeed. You want this to turn into a studio. You want this to turn into funding. You want this to turn into a solid team so that you can do the next game right, right? That's my approach because just listening to you there, you said like building my game, and we're not approaching this budget, right? Like what I'm talking about is not approaching the budget as the budget for the game. It's approaching the budget for the studio making the game. And those are two different things. The game is part of the studio, but it's only one small part. And if you are only budgeting for that one small part, there's so much more that's going to be left on the table that you're just not even accounting for, right? Like the amount of time that I've spoken with smaller indie teams who are like, well, we don't know any publishers. It's like, you've been developing for 2 years. You have a solid product. Why don't you know any publishers? And it's just like, well, we just didn't know we had to do that. We didn't know how to do that. And that's okay. You're not going to learn everything unless somebody tells you how to do things or how to approach things. But like all of that time doing that kind of work, marketing, setting up your business, figuring out how do we do Google Docs together? Are we doing Discord together? Are we using Trello, Hack and Plan? Are we paying for a subscription to softwares? Like understanding that whole process. Like, are we using Perforce or GitHub? Like Dropbox? Like there's so many different ways of doing it. But if you don't account for that in your budget early, that's just going to overwhelm you later because the game on its own by itself can be really difficult to manage.
What you said there about there's the difference between making a game and then, or like me making my game and then building the game for like the future in the studio. It makes sense now that you've said that out loud, because in my mind, that's what I was reaching for. But I think I was approaching it from a mindset where it's like fear. What's the point if I'm going to try and I get it wrong? Like it would be a waste of time to not already know how to do it in the first place. So why even try? And I didn't realize that my whole mindset on everything we were talking about here has completely shifted.
Right in the middle of recording. You're welcome. Yeah, but a lot of times that's really all it takes for a lot of teams, right? When I'm having a meeting with them and just talking about it this way, being like, add some perspective, some depth to your plans, and it changes everything. How you approach things changes differently. One of my favorite examples is a team I was working with where they were so hyper focused on making sure that everything felt juicy is a term that's thrown around a lot. Basically, there's a lot of feedback systems, right? Screen shake, still frame pauses and like combat, all kinds of stuff like that. They were just like obsessed with that. But the game was bad. There was no direction. Nobody actually put the time in to develop a good core game loop because they figured that if each individual like interaction felt amazing, the game would feel amazing. And they were like, well, we'll just get really good at this. And then it doesn't matter if the game's bad, our next game will be good. Well, no, you never put any time in learning how to make a good game first. So
Well, so
all you
how does
have is a bunch
budget
of polished stuff.
affect that kind of stuff?
Well, because their budget, right, is very similar to the mindset of like, I am free for my game, right? A very similar mindset. Their mindset is, oh, well, it's more cost effective if I just do all the polish now and make it look great. But that doesn't account for the fact that the overall game is not great. So you have to spend more time later making the game feel great. And now all those great individual pieces no longer
Oh,
fit on this full game, right?
okay,
So
that makes
they're
sense.
just it's hard, but you have to start from your basics. And in terms of budget, that's also hard because it's much easier to look at a ship, right? And figure out, okay, I know the structure of it. I have no idea how I'm going to wire it, but you don't have to care about wiring it. That comes way later, right? That's like polish phase. That's like optimization. Like you don't have to worry about that. You just have to figure out like what's the shape of what you're making? What are my constraints? What are my direction? Once you've set that barrier, right? It's now a constraint. You're not you're not going to go past that. You're not going to tweak it later, and that informs other decisions, other things that you can budget for now. Now you can account for, to plan for them, and getting really good at budget estimation and learning how to plan out the design and implementation of a game all stems from that, from putting practice into doing that, trying to create a blueprint for the game development itself and knowing, you know, where are the bounds, like what can I do within this limited space? And that's why the budget's important.
So I feel very blessed to have you a part of this with me because you have a very strong understanding, or at least as far as I know, from my experience, a strong understanding. So how do we approach the start of something like this? If you weren't here and I was just starting this on my own, what should be my first steps? How should I begin the process of this? Because I feel like this is something that's really important for people that have never made this before, or people that are still new, or I guess even veterans. It feels, I don't know, just give me the knowledge. You've sold me on it. What do I need to do?
First of all, is it's figuring out your estimate of what it's going to take.
So, like you're talking about from like estimate it's going to take from like the beginning all the way to game completion, or is this like from beginning to prototype, or is this from like beginning to it's out there, we're promoting it and we're raking in millions of dollars along with it? Like what do you mean by from like what's the time, like where does it go?
Yeah. Well, it's the prototype, right? And when I say prototype, I'm not talking demo build, right? That's more like your MVP. We're not talking about a minimal viable product. We're just talking about all the systems are in. We can tinker with the game. Everything could be cubes and circles. Like that doesn't matter. What matters is there a core loop and is it fun, right? So when in terms of budgeting it, you have to know what your features are, your mechanics and your systems, like all of the rules, all the core things that make your game a game. That's not art. That's not audio. That's not animation. That's not UI art. That's not any of that, right? Those are all extra layers later. So once you've defined that core framework for what your game is, how it works, and all the rules, you can start building that, right? And we've talked about earlier in talking about prototypes, where you could use paper, you could use spreadsheets, you can just tinker on in basic code, right? There's lots of ways to prototype how things should work and whether or not that feels fun and interesting.
So we're building our first budget then from, hey, let's make a game, to the prototype. And then is there like another budget that gets created for the next parts after, or does that budget just, once we get to that point, expand and then build into the others? It's not about wanting to understand how it's done, but just trying to understand the framework of like, is there something I need to prepare for or something I need to plan for after that needs to be done in the beginning stages to make the later stages easier?
Well, it's all the same budget. You just are worrying about the start right now.
Okay.
Right. So your prototype is the start of your game. Your initial budget about whether or not you should attempt the prototype is just for the start, right? Like I said, it's figuring out what those core set of rules are and what will it take to make them.
And so is this something that a lot of studios that have been working for a long time have done then? And like that's like an approach they start where it's like, let's just start with the prototype, and then that's just the first thing that they worry about budgeting, and then as they're going through it they realize if it's going to continue on, and that's when they just like they have the frameworks of everything needed for the budget to continue going forward.
Well, it's not set in stone, right? I don't want to give the impression that this is the way you must do it. It's just if you want to get started and you're new and you're small, this will help you avoid a ton of mistakes that are going to really hinder you later, right? So big studios, they have whole R&D teams. I think I've mentioned this in a previous episode where Yeah, that's what they do is they bring in generalists. They bring in people who are very fast at mocking up certain mechanics and grapple systems. And what if we do this and we put this together? Is this fun? I don't know. Let's run around as a cube man and try this mechanic out. Yeah, this is kind of interesting, or no, it's not. And okay, here's another feature. And often what'll happen is you'll just have a list of like stuff that's fun that people like enjoy tinkering with, even though it's just like visually garbage. It's nothing great. And then those become candidates that designers will take and say, okay, these are actual interactions that people enjoy doing that feel good without any kind of extra design or anything else. So let's build a game and put these mechanics together. It's the same process of why, like franchises, right? When you have a series and they come out with this version 2 and it has all the same stuff from the first game, but like extra stuff added on, hopefully that's that process is they already know what works. We're just going to replicate it and like add more to it and add more to it and add more to it. Right. And ideally you're supposed to, you grow this big library of stuff that works well, that your teams can do well. But when you're starting out, you don't have that, right? So there's more risk involved, and just understanding what that risk is what this is all about. Because
Okay.
you don't want to spend a year building this, and at the end feel like you got nothing out of it.
I feel like I have a good understanding of the at least the basic expectations then for our budget. So then how do we begin to estimate how do we begin to estimate this budget from like someone who's never done this before?
Time tracking is a good thing, right? Like if you've ever done freelance work, right, you have to keep track of how long you're working and add it up. And then most clients are usually pretty picky. They want to know, like, I want to know what you did between 1 and 3 p.m. on Tuesday. And so you like write yourself a note and you're like, this is what I worked on. This is what I got. This is how I left it. Right. Like that's pretty standard contracting style
Okay,
work.
so we're even using something as simple as toggle or something like that, where every time I go to start something, I can just hit play or hit record and then throw some notes in it, and then get some basic stuff through that.
Yeah, right. There's all kinds of tools, but the what I'm trying to impress here is just the importance of time tracking. So when you're starting out brand new, apart from going and talking to a whole bunch of people in the discipline, like junior programmers, and being like, how long does it take all you guys to do this specific scenario? And then one guy will say 1 hour, one will say 4, one will say 2, etc. Right? And you just average it out based off of like industry input. That's one way to do it. However, if you're solo dev or just like a couple guys, the best way to do it is to just attempt one of those tasks. Now, this might sound a little counterintuitive because, I'm saying do the budget first, but now I'm telling you to do the work. Like, what's going on? Well, the reason being is because if you know you have to make an inventory system, you don't have to make the inventory system for your game. What you need to do is figure out what's a bare minimum that counts as like an inventory system in the direction I want to head, and track yourself. Figure out, okay, how long did it take me to do this? If you track over the course of 1 week that it took you 23 hours to get to a point where it compiles, and it does everything that you need it to do so that you could build off of it later, take that time and say, okay, that 24 hours, right? That's how long it takes to do the basic step of a mechanic. Then when you go to polish it and make it your own for your game concept, assume it's going to take twice as long because you're polishing. Then assume you don't know what you're doing, so add like an additional 50-cent buffer just because, right? Like maybe I don't feel like working next week and I should account for that time anyways.
Okay, so then like going through and figuring out some basic tasks, timing how long it takes to finish those, and then using that as a baseline to start figuring out the budget, or even maybe looking at like past work, because I'm assuming I'd like to assume that a lot of people coming into game design, they've done different tasks in the past through the learning process. So if they've made a model before, they could just take like, okay, well, I know that it took me 4 hours to make that model, so I'll just use 4 hours as the base. And then they can at least use that and then adjust it and modify it as they're learning more.
There's a caveat there, right? There's a big thing here that a lot of professionals will know to account for that juniors don't. And it's that your modeling of your character, physical time modeling, yes, that may have took 4 hours, but how much time did you take to think of the idea, to research the idea, to plan out the idea, to get motivated by it, to research other options about how to approach different problems in between modeling it? How much downtime did you have? Because like one day you were just like, I can't do this, I'm going to work on the gun, right? Instead of the character model. And all of that extra stuff, time you spent talking about feedback, showing it to like your mentor or your partner or whoever to get feedback, does this look good? And then incorporating that feedback, all of that is the time it actually took you to make that model. All of it. From like first idea, I'm going to do it, right up until I finish. So guaranteed it was not just 4 hours.
So then I'm assuming with going through this, with this stage of it too, there's a lot of it where I'll think I've got it figured out, and then as I'm actually working on stuff, I'll be making adjustments and then adding extra things in where it's like, oh, okay, this actually needed some extra time. And just being able to approach this with an open mindset, knowing that I didn't get it right, but I'm going to try and get it as close to what I think is possible, and expect to be adding adding time to it later for all the things that I never thought to think about or account for before. At first thought, I would not have included the let's make the budget as a part of the budget for making the game. A lot of people
don't. All right, nobody includes the time that it takes to set up the studio, to set up like Dropbox, to set up Perforce. Like, to go through that process can be lengthy if you've never done stuff like that before. And somebody on your team is going to have to do it, right?
Now, are there little things that we can do to help ourselves out through those moments where it's just like, instead of just like figuring out all of the individual things, just throwing like a lump number for now so that I can just use that for the time being and then just come back in and then if I feel later to just go and start breaking up more, then do that? Is that I want to assume that's like a safe thing to do, especially if I'm a solo dev and I'm working on it on myself. I could just be like 6 hours for setting up programs, and then later on, once I've set up a bunch of programs, I can come back later and be like, okay, well, it wasn't quite 6 hours, it was actually 9, and then like here's the different things there. Or is it important to go in and try and be more specific in the beginning?
It's important to be specific in the beginning. Right?
That's not the answer I was looking for, James.
I know, but you know what? That's why nobody does it. Right? That's why no one does it, is because it's extra work. They don't see the value in it now or even soon. So they don't want to do it. It's like, it's like risk reward. I'm not going to do that. Well, this is long-term game plan we're talking about. We're talking like, you manage to build a prototype. It's fun. You go to pitch your funding. First thing the publishers are going to ask you is like, what's your budget? Well, if you've done this early and you fight through the grind and you account for everything fairly accurately and you keep adjusting as you go, you can go into that meeting and be like, oh yeah, we spent this much time. Here's the thing. Here's our budget. Do you know how like top of the pile you become when you can show that you properly know how to estimate and account for your budgeting and your time that it takes to do your game, to operate as a team?
So if we're taking a game to a publisher and we show them the budget, like we're show like this part that we're going through now was of like the planning and the process, that's also included in the budget that they see.
Yeah, they'll see that, it takes us 30 hours to design this mechanic. And if we send them a pitch and we say we have 30 mechanics, and then in our budget we've only said 200 hours to do the design for the whole game, they're going to be like, well, wait a minute, your prototype mechanic stuff took you 30 hours per mechanic. You have all these other mechanics, like 200 hours. That doesn't even mathematically add up, right?
One of my fears with taking a budget to a publisher, especially if it's like a first game, and I've budgeted, like I've gone extremely accurate for how long, it's especially if it's like a first game and I haven't done it before, I would be worried that I show it to them and I've got stuff perfect and it's great. And I know that if I go to work on another game, I'm going to get stuff done quicker. But showing them that one, I'd be worried that they'd look at it and be like, look at how long this person's taking to get these things done. This person clearly doesn't know what they're doing. And then because of that, I don't get approved. And they look at it, it's like, wow, this person's wasting so much time doing these things. When really it's because it's my first game and I don't know. Like I'd be really scared about stuff like that. And I'm sure there's things that before we've started talking here, if I would put a budget together, I'd be like, okay, well, it took me 4 hours, but we're gonna just say it was like 2.5 because I don't want it to look bad.
Okay, so let's run with that. You did that. Your first milestone was coming up, and now you are basically 100 work hours behind schedule because you are not able to work at that speed. But the publisher's already signed you. You're beholden. Your contract, like you're you're legally bound to hit this milestone, or you're basically screwed. What are you going to do? How are you going to fix this? How are you going to just manifest 100 hours worth of work? And keep in mind, when you're working under a deadline like that, basically crunch, you're also not as efficient. So that 100 hours that you're missing to do like dedicated good work is actually now you're going to have to crunch probably closer to 200 hours, 250 hours, because there's going to be a lot of mistakes. You're frantic, you're panicking, you're just pushing stuff in. Stuff's going to slip through the cracks. Yes, you might meet the milestone, but the quality of what you produced is actually not that great. You just
well, now my fear is going the other way. Should I just be like, oh, I know it's going to take, or I'm pretty sure it's going to take me 5 hours. Should I just write down 7?
Well, first of all, here's I guess what I want to point out about your fear here, right? Is like, what if I get funded? Right? That's where the fear is stemming from. Is like, what if I don't get funded?
Yeah, what if they look at the numbers I put and they say, you're not what we're looking for?
I want everybody to understand that the publishers only care about what if you get funded, right? So your developers are worried about what if I don't get funded. Publishers are worried about what if you get funded. How are you going to make my money? Can we trust you? Are you reliable? Are you going to finish the game? It doesn't matter. Sometimes it matters, but it doesn't matter if you're a little slower than other people they're working with. They're not judging you based off of people who've worked in major AAA studios and, have like released 10 of their own games solo project, and they're just like wizards in like they don't care. That's not where the judgment comes from. Where the judgment comes from is they're going to look at your pitch, they're going to look at the designs, they're going to look at all the information you give them, like, hey, we have this fan backing, hey, this is our mechanics, here's our game design document, here's the plan. They're going to look at all that and say, okay, this isn't a reasonable plan. Are they asking for a reasonable amount of money? Because they know that, like, when you say, oh, it takes 6 hours, but I'm going to cut it down to 4, they know you're wrong. Because they build games, they fund games that get funded. So first of all, they're going to know that you dropped it down shorter than what it actually should be. So you should actually aim higher. You should actually say, no, this actually took 8 hours. I know I could do it in 6, but I'm going to say 8. Why? Life gets in the way. What if there's a power outage one day? You don't want that to screw over the rest of your development, right? So you add padded time. Like, this is an industry known thing. You pad time for the unexpected problems. Maybe there's a Windows update and now nobody can compile for 3 days, and that puts the entire development behind by a week. Like, that stuff happens, right? So we know to account for them. They don't care. They really don't care. Like, the only time that's a big issue is when you're presenting a game plan and they know roughly the cost of who you're working with and what the rates are, what your team is. They know how much a business costs. They know what it's going to cost in terms of time to build these mechanics based off of your experience. And if the budget doesn't match up, if they look at your budget and say, well, you're asking for 300,000, but the last 6 games we funded of this caliber only needed about 120,000 to actually do it. So you are technically like 100% over budget of what you need to get this done. Just generally estimating, right? So like, why? What's happening here? And then that usually comes down to the fact that, like, you as an indie, you might be hiding the fact that you're not professionally trained and you're not confident. So you're asking for money so that you could take a course to get certified in, say, network programming so you can deliver this project. They don't want that, right? It's not that they don't want to pay for it. It's that they're not paying you to go study to learn how to do this project for basically for them, right? For this contract. So you just be open about it. You just say, look, like we're junior, we're figuring this out the first time. And if they come back and they say, well, we like your budget, we like your project, but if you don't have the experience set, are you going to hire somebody? Would you hire a senior? Do you know what that senior costs?
So for this kind of stuff, then it sounds like it's in my best interest to be as accurate as possible with the padded time naturally just added onto it. And including like everything, like when I'm building this budget to include anything and everything that could be expenses that are relevant to it, because if I go to take it to a publisher in this scenario, and if they go to ask questions, then I'm not making stuff up, making things more complicated. I can just be honest with them. And then from there, maybe they'll say yes, maybe they'll say no, but I'll learn hopefully from it why and what might need to be different next time, which it sucks to hear, to say the word next time. But it sounds like if I took some of those, shortcuts or, changed some of the stuff so that it looked better, it sounds like it'd be more likely to make things more difficult for me in the future.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's play a little role play here. Okay. I show up at your house. I have a pair of really long scissors, and I say, "Good evening, sir. I'm here. I want to cut your lawn. It's going to be $1,000. I'll be done sometime around tomorrow evening. But I'll get started immediately. I have full availability. Would you hire me?"
No.
Okay. If I came to your house and I said, "Hey, I want to cut your lawn. It's $500, and I have a really powerful lawnmower and everything else." And I said, "Yeah, I'll be done in about like 5 minutes." Would you hire me?
Probably not.
Because that still seems fishy, right?
Yeah.
But if I came to your house and I'm like, "Hey, you have a really big lawn. I see that your landscaping is pretty neat. It's very bespoke, and you don't have any barriers, but I'm very careful. I'm very diligent. I have some moderate grade lawn mowing equipment. I got a weed whacker. It's going to cost roughly around $700, but I'll take about 6 hours. I have another guy who's helping me. We're going to leave everything nice and clean. We promise we're not going to damage any of your stuff. And if we do, we'll gladly pay to replace it."
Because of all of that extra stuff, and it sounds reasonable.
But I'm giving assurances, right? I'm making
Yes.
it clear. This is my situation. This is what I'm bringing to the table. I'm looking at what you're looking for. You want somebody who cares about your yard. Those other two examples were people who just showed up and were like, "You have a yard. I want some money," right? Most indie developers are kind of like those first two guys. They show up, they're like, "Look at my awesome game, look at my great idea, look at like I'm getting tons of Twitter and like give me the money." And so you have to think about the other guy. It's like, would I give you $100,000 with what you just told me? Probably not. And as an indie, you have to get in that business mindset. Is if somebody was pitching my game to me and asking 200,000, 300,000 to build it, just a smaller scope game or something, right? Maybe less, 100,000. What would it take for me to give them $100,000? Because you got to remember, this is an investment. I'm probably not going to see any of this money back. But if I do, the hope is I'm going to get even more back, right? So what would that take? And if you think about it that way, your whole mindset should shift again, where you're like, "Oh yeah, you know what? Me being extra detail oriented, tracking all my time, knowing exactly how much time it takes to come up with a character idea, a backstory for a character, rough character designs, visual designs, technical designs, and then doing all the art and modeling and texturing and animation and implementing it. I know that this is like 2 weeks bare minimum." And that's for a moderate character. If you can break that down and say, "This is our rough timeline that we're going to do. This is the process that it takes to build a character. We have 10 characters." Well, you're very clear. You're very deliberate. You've shown really good numbers of this is what it's going to take to make. it makes sense that when you ask for a budget to pay the designer, the rigger, the animator, and the coder to put those characters together over the course of 6 months, that makes sense. That's good because you're showing you understand the process. You know where all the money is going. You know where all the effort is going. We're not Publishers are not looking for perfect numbers. They just want to know that you have some idea of like understanding what the process is, because everybody knows everything is an estimate until it's done.
Earlier when we were talking, I still wasn't really fond of the idea. Like before start making the game, just go through the steps, time it out, figure out what it is. But if I'm not willing to take that time, like that's okay, that's fine. You know, I'm just interested in making a game, and I just want to go and do that. But if I'm willing, but okay, I'm going in circles. But
if you're not, if I may,
yeah,
if you're not willing to even put in the effort to do this stuff to better your chances of success later, then yeah, chances are this is not something you want to do professionally or for monetization or as a career. Maybe it's just something for fun. And you're right. This is the whole point of doing the budget this early, like straight out of concept idea before we even write like the game design doc. The whole reason about thinking about this is to figure out that mindset. Is did we come up with those initial two ideas, like in our case, the idle game or the narrative game? Did we come up with them for the purpose of making money? Because if we're not willing to do any of this stuff around budget and estimation and all this stuff, then obviously that's not aligned, right? What we're willing to put in versus what we expect out, that's not the same. But if we're just doing this as a way to document the process, learn, educate people, and it doesn't even matter about that stuff, well, that's still in alignment. So if we decide to just sort of like be a little hokey with the estimation, that's fine, because it's not going to impact the outcome. And figuring out where you are, where your team members are on like that spectrum is super important, because that determines whether or not you'll even make it.
If the two of us were sitting down to make this game and we were going through this process and you were all gung-ho, it's like, all right, this is the budget, we got to start getting the budget. And then I'm sitting here like, well, I just want to make the game. Like, we make some models, we do this, we do that. It like, maybe it would work if you decided, you're like, all right, fine, I'll take on all of the big hat and I'll do that. But then it also, we know in that moment that we both have to agree. It's like, okay, James is putting more of a stake into this than I am. And we would have to, you know, I don't know if this is the right term for this, but budget things accordingly for that now too, because he's putting in all the work. I'm not I'm not making a game. I'm just working on something, at least in the terms of our relationship. And if that's the situation that happened with it.
Exactly. Right. And this is the exact same thing that you should be thinking about as a developer when you're approaching like rev share projects. How serious are the people? Are the people who are wearing the hats seriously thinking about this stuff? Are they doing that work? There's a reason why they get the share, right? There's a reason they get the biggest share. There's a reason the CEO, right? The directors, everybody says, I don't know why people are paid so much. It's because they're doing all of this work that everyone else thinks isn't necessary.
I feel like things can always change with people, like depending on their life circumstances. But it feels like if there's a lot of the games I've heard about where a team's come together and then just a couple people have faltered off and fell off and then the game ended up collapsing. I want to say it's because, or I'd like to assume it's because they never went through a process like this. Or enough of the process to really establish where everybody's proper mindset was on things. Because anybody can come in and say, I'm in on this, I'm 100% ready to go. But then when it actually comes to doing the work and planning out this process, that's really where we'll find out. When we first came together to start this, I had no idea about any of this. And then once we started talking about it, even again in today's episode, I was like, oh my God, is this really what I want to be doing? And because we went through the process, I was able to come to the conclusion myself, versus if we didn't go through this and then later on some of this came up, if I was already feeling tired and exhausted from certain elements and then this shows up, that probably could have pushed me over the edge where I'm like, no, like this is too much. This is too much unexpected things that I had no idea that were coming. But at least now I can prepare for it, which makes sense. You know, it comes full circle. It's part of the budget, yep. Not the money part, but the energy part.
Hey, exactly.
Sorry, it took me a while to get there.
No, that's good. I mean, it's good because There's probably other people who are taking a long time to get to that point too, where just not understanding how it comes. But if it comes full circle, you'll get there. And yeah, it's important. It's important to think about it and just not just generalize, because you miss out on all the fine details. You miss out on all the actual hard stuff.
So I feel like this is not going to be an easy question to answer. But let's say there's a group of 4 people getting together, and 4 of them they're going through this process, and they realize that 2 of them are super invested. They're wanting to go through and do all this. The other 2 are starting to like lean back a little bit. Where they're like, this is a little bit more than I thought I was going to be getting myself into. How do we navigate situations like that? And also, is this relevant to the discussion of budgeting? Or is this like a whole other thing on its own?
It could be a whole other thing, but I think it is very relevant because this is the intended point of doing this budget this early, right? It's intended to make you have these hard moments of, questioning your sanity about whether or not you want to do this, right? And in a situation where like half of your team is not that motivated, you need to figure out, okay, well, do we build it anyways? Because here's the other reality that a lot, comes from that question, or this problem, is that if it gets funding, if it does make it, right? If it does sell really well afterwards, are the 2 people who put in, more effort than was originally required because they're picking up the slack from the other 2 going to be bitter when those other 2 people are like, hey, we are also 25% owners of this project. How come I'm not earning 25% of the revenue, right? This is a real thing. Like, are you going to be comfortable knowing that I did the lion's share of the work, but I'm not getting a lion's share of the reward? I put in all the hard effort to make sure we actually made it, but how much of the effort from the other 2 actually contributed to meaningful, let's say, progress, right? Like landing funding, let's say. How much of their work actually contributed to landing that funding? Am I going to feel bitter about that? Am I going to be resentful? Am I willing to go through the legal process later of having those 2 sue us too? Because we're like, screw off. Like, no, you don't get a full cut because you walked away. However, those 2 were still there at the start. So technically, they can make a case that, no, this is like, you could never get here without me because we were there at the beginning, right? How comfortable are you with that process? And the real answer here is that you don't do that game. If you're not all on board with those tough questions or those tough decisions, then you don't make that game because you're not going to make it anyways.
Because I feel like in a situation like that, if they're all on board where they break it up, where they realize like, okay, these 2 people are way more invested, we're going to go, like, they're going to get more out of all of this, then I feel like if they all come to an agreement and they all understand that, then it sounds like that could work. But it has to be something where they've all agreed. And when you say all in agreement, it doesn't mean everybody is all in agreement. We want to make this, we're all getting equal shares. This is the work that is expected of everybody. And then this is the amount that each person's getting out of it because of the expectations. And we all agree on that together.
Yeah, it's that, right? It's, you all have to be in agreement with how it's going to move forward. Where this moves away from budgeting is in, if we've done a budget and you still really want to do this concept and the team is together, that's the time you have to seriously think about starting your studio. And what does that mean? Who are the executives? Who are the owners? Who have the shares? Who's gets what cut? Are we all owners of the studio, but we're splitting the revenue from the game separately depending on output? right? Like, how does all of that work? And then that's the level where you have to start talking to lawyers, because we're all in agreement now. We better sign a contract that says
Well,
so.
do they need to do a studio route or anything like that? Because I've seen games on Steam where it's got like the developers and it's just got 4 different people's names. They didn't like come together and make a whole team together.
Well, the question is, are those four people still together? Are they still friends? Right? That's the question. And more often than not, no, they're not friends anymore. They're not on the same terms anymore, because this stuff gets mixed in, and it's really hard. The whole point for the contract is you might be bitter later that I'm earning more, but I put in way more effort. And sure, you could tell yourself, well, I'm okay with that. But what if the game pops off like Balatro? And now all of a sudden you earned like 2 million and I earned like 200 million. Like, now all of a sudden that thing that you were perfectly okay with because you understood I did most of the business stuff and you were just doing like artwork is different. It's different. It really shouldn't. That's still $2 million you didn't have before. But the reality is, people, just the way we are wired, it becomes different, because we don't care about the value, we care about the ratio, right?
So then,
So we're
what about a situation where, like, let's say me and you were wanting to make a game together because we wanted to go through the whole process. We wanted to take it seriously, but we were doing it so that it was like a portfolio piece, because we didn't actually want to run a studio, or we didn't actually want to go through this, but we knew that, going through this whole process would be really great for us to land a job somewhere else. Should we is it still good to make the studio in that situation, or does it really matter if it's the studio and then the separate names when we know we're going to go separate ways after? Hypothetically, I hope we don't go separate ways.
I don't think so. I think we're pretty in alignment. I think that it's still important to do the studio, or at least do contracts, right? Because here's the thing: the world, the systems out there in the marketplace, do not cater to, oh, we're a bunch of buddies. They don't. You don't have 4 people sign up to become the owners of the same account that owns the distribution on Steam for your game. One person, one entity is that account. One person is the admin. And I've met a lot of indies and a lot of professionals who very early in their career, they contributed to games that were, just for portfolio pieces, or they worked on art pieces that were just an art test, and then it ended up in the game, and they never get credit, they never get paid. All of a sudden the game switches from, it's not free to play demo anymore, and now it's a full on like pay to win clone or something,
So
right? And
it's
then
also about your own protection and your own safety.
own protection. Yeah, you always have to consider yourself first, right? Yourself and your family. And you should always protect yourself, even with your best friends. Like you should still do that. You should still come to an agreement about how it's going to work, where the boundaries are, what the expectations are. And here's the thing: that can change. It can change over time. Things start popping off, and in our example that we talked about, those 2 people who are just sort of like hokey pokey, maybe they're like, whoa, we see the value you put in, we really want to step up. You can change the contracts. You could go back to a lawyer and be like, yeah, we want to update. We want to do a version 2 where no, we are comfortably going to give up some of our shares, or give up some of our control, whatever you want to call it, and give more to these guys. But that comes with conditions. The conditions are, once you step up, you don't step down. You have to come here, because if you don't, and you decide to step down later when things get hard, because it's a roller coaster, it goes up and down, right? The whole development process. And if at later you decide you want to get off the ride, you give up what you gained by stepping up, right? Like, you have to have those terms in place, because nothing is going to make you feel more betrayed than giving up what you rightfully had, and then have somebody step up and then back off, and now you're dumped with the work, but they still kept the reward, right? Like, it's just not a fair exchange. It's just not fair. So having contracts in place is a big thing. And this is starting to go into its own topic, but yeah, like budgeting leads to those kinds of discussions, like serious commitment, like where are we going to go? The other reason why this will come up is because if you want to get funding, let's say you're making a VR game, and you want it to go in the Quest 3 and you want Meta's support, they're not going to give it to you as a partnership or a sole proprietor, right? Or even just a couple dudes. You must be a corporation. If you want any kind of grant or federal funding from the government to like build up a prototype or something, you must be a corporation.
This
That
is
means
it. Like we're in Canada, so is that something that's kind of universal in like the States and other places as well, or is that just for where we are?
it's pretty universal. Like people
Okay.
don't invest in, like people
Depending where
don't
you
just
live,
find a
definitely something
person.
you should look into as well, just in case.
Yes, yes, yes. It's always
We could be
different.
wrong.
The reason, right? The reason why it is so broadly accepted that that's how these steps work is because it's a better way for the government or investors or whoever to protect their investments that they're putting into your company. So if your company
Ah,
fucks up, like you go bankrupt, like they own all your IPs, they own everything that you have because they'll try and turn around and sell it. They'll make it themselves. They'll give it to a different studio. We see that all the time, right? Where it's
whereas if
like,
it's
nope,
a person, they can't really own the person.
like what are you gonna do? Take their house and their kids, like take the food out of their mouth? Like nobody wants to do that, right? But a corporation, you could do that. Us as a corporation, if we screw up with a big time client and the client's like, I'm gonna eat you alive because I'm hurting now. They have every right to do that. And that's the nature of the game, right? So so yeah, like when you do your budgets and you realize this is, yeah, like we're really motivated, we really want to get here. If our intent is to be towards a professional commercial success, that's our intent, you're gonna end up having to corporate. You're gonna have to make a business. You're gonna have to go through all that extra stuff now because that's what's required to get there. You don't like, it's a very, 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 very rare that somebody is just like, oh, I'm a solo dev and I made this game and now I'm Velatro and I'm just like, just blew up and like here nobody knows who I am and I'm quiet and like I'm a super indie success or like Stardew Valley. Like we can name them because there's only like a handful of them over like 50 years,
Yeah, and
people
how
who have
many
done
other
that.
people have tried to do that and haven't succeeded?
Yeah, orders of magnitude more, right? So you need to expect you're going to be the orders of magnitude more. Expect the failure. But if you're building up towards success with the intent of succeeding, chances are you will get there. You will succeed. It might not
I
be
feel like it's also important to say too, expect the failure, but don't plan to fail. Expect the failure, but you just leave the door to success open. Build it,
perfect.
make it a little bigger here and there where you can too.
Exactly, right? Like why wouldn't you? These are all very good reasons why budgeting is important and how it has serious long-term implications.
Yeah, I'm also still afraid of when we go down to really build the budget because I'm sure, like, it sounds challenging and it sounds difficult, but I'm sure once we get started on it, it's going to be like, oh, okay, this is still more challenging and more work than I thought it was going to be.
It's not too bad. You just have to be granular about it, right? It's not thinking about the game like design for game. What's the budget? It's no, what are all the pieces that count as design? And we covered this in that other episode. It's when we were talking specifically about the narrative game because you gave a mock estimate of what you thought, and like I think your initial estimate was like 6 months, 3 or 6 months, and it was like,
Oh yeah, okay, last episode.
yeah,
Last.
last episode. So like if you go back and you see, or you've seen the end of that episode, you'll see like I broke down the design and it was still very, very general, but I broke it down into granular sections where I'm like, no, this is the mechanics, this is the systems, this is the overall design. And design, a lot, there's a big misconception that the game design happens at like the first 30% of the game and then you don't need it anymore. No, design is a full-time right to launch and even after launch role.
Yeah, I thought it was a one and done thing. You're like, all right, done. We're good to go. Let's make this.
Many people do, right? But it's not. It's very long term. So however long your game is running for, you are paying for a designer. right? You are having to do design work.
Hello, this is Future Spencer. I just finished editing the video, and originally we had a whole other outro planned for it. But really, going back to this episode, there was a whole lot of information to take in today on budgeting. And personally, I still found it something very challenging to take it, and partially accept, because at least for me personally, it's not a fun process. I don't like the idea of having to do a budget and to go through and do all this work. But after the discussions with James, I understand how important and crucial it can be in a studio setting. If I was to go and work on a game singly on my own, I think this is a process that I personally would mostly skip, because I know that in that setting, it's a game that's for myself and something that I'm just doing because I enjoy. But to work on a game with other people, especially the game that James and myself are going to be working on here, this process is one of the most important steps going into this, so that we understand the scope of what it is that we're doing, what we're going to need, and where we're going to go. And I hope that someday in the future, when I'm some big successful game designer, like I'm sure a lot of us dream that we'll be able to be, hopefully I'll have other people to do the budgets for me at that point. But from the discussions that I've had with James, just understanding the process is extremely important, because it's not just going to be important for the game that we're trying to make right now, but it's also something that we can carry through to the other departments and the other sections of game design that we go to work on. The biggest lesson that I've taken home from this whole thing is that in the way that we look at a budget, it's not just the dollar sign. It's not just the money spent in it, but it's also the time investments and having a better understanding of the amount of work that goes into each of the different sections of a game, so that we just have a better understanding of the whole process of building it. Hopefully that makes sense. Sorry for just regurgitating things that were talked about on the episode, but really I felt like that was the important thing to say. So let's do it. Let's make and develop amazing video games and get rich and famous. That's the dream.